Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to A Day in the Neighborhood. Tonight we have a very, very special guest, former Supervisor Jake McGoldrick. Former Supervisor Jake McGoldrick served with the City and County of San Francisco as a member of the Board of Supervisors. He had quite a long list of accomplishments, and we would not have enough time to enumerate all of them. Mayor Gavin Newsom have most recently disclosed and gone to the Board of Supervisors chambers, the first in years, and perhaps Supervisor McGoldrick could tell us about that, to talk about either the $300 million or the $500 million deficit that the city of San Francisco has to resolve mid-year. So, welcome to A Day in the Neighborhood, Supervisor McGoldrick.
Myrna.
Mayor Gavin Newsom spent 7.5 hours taping his State of the Union address. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to listen to any of it.
Yeah.
But it seems that a lot of people would agree that he forgot to mention about this incredible deficit, either $300 million or $500 million. In a budget of $6.7 billion, we're looking at 30%. That tells the average person, excuse me, we are bankrupt, aren't we?
Well, we're not quite bankrupt.
Okay.
But, I don't think you have to go and get a PhD in economics to figure out how to do a budget any more than you have to, have a master's degree to figure out how to do your own home budget. When you only have $100 to fill the shopping cart, you can only spend $100. Mm-hmm. And when you've only got X amount of millions and hundreds of millions and so on, and what we call discretionary general fund monies, you have to figure out how to work within that and see if you can get any additional revenue. Just like if you only have $100 to go shopping, maybe you can figure out how to, earn an extra $10, $20, $30 somewhere doing something, whatever your level of income is. And it's just a number with a lot more zeros or less zeros behind it. The basic principle is how much is coming in and what are your priorities. Are you going to buy a porterhouse steak and filet mignon, or are you going to buy some ground meat and hopefully some maybe turkey and not get too much fat in it? And be careful what you're doing with your money.
Right.
So you start there. I mean, it's just common sense.
Right.
And when we look at the budget, I was the budget chair last year,
Right.
And which ended a few months back now, it seems like, but it's actually about 5-6 months now. And when we look at the budget, I was on the budget committee about 4 or 5 times in my 8 years. What we did was you go line by line, department by department, program by program. You look at certain factors that have to do with priorities, and you say, who can we afford to help? Mm-hmm. What services can we keep in place? What services can we enhance? If we had some extra money a few years ago, we had over $50 million extra. So
before we get into that, when Mayor Newsom took over, became mayor, San Francisco's budget then, that's 4 years ago, was $4.7 billion. And at that point, I believe there was approximately 24,000 city employees.
Well, there were actually a little under 28,000, yeah.
Before?
Yeah.
But now we are at $6.7 billion.
And we have almost the same amount of employees.
I thought the number of employees have increased by 2,000 to 3,000 in 4 years.
Not quite that much. No.
Oh, okay.
No.
So could you explain how did we get here? How did?
Well, a lot of the increases have to do with what they call MOUs or contracts, labor contracts, and
so these are salaries.
Yeah, salaries.
Okay. They're not direct services. They're not
Yeah, well, those salaries are given to people who provide direct services, be it public health services or safety services.
A lot of us would love to
like
have
that.
one of those jobs now.
Oh,
with
I know a lot of people would love to have one of those jobs.
That's high,
yeah, absolutely. You know, we've always been, I think, as a city, as a very strong pro-labor type city, you know, very decent with our city family of employees.
Right.
20, whether it was 20,000, 25,000, 27,899, whatever right now.
Right.
And you know, in that sense, I think we've helped to have some very, very competent people, some very professional people working for us for a long time.
Right.
Some of whom could have gone out and perhaps, and this is the trade-off, they could have perhaps made more money somewhere else, but the pressures in other places, you know, might be different. We try to give people a good working environment, good working conditions, decent, you know, good benefits, wages, and then say, do a good job. And, you know, 99% of people do a good job. You got a bad apple here, a bad apple there, and, you know, and that makes the press, and, you know, man bites dog makes the press, and a dog bites man doesn't make the press. So, you know, you get some articles like this about some, you know, occasional bums that you find working for the city. But boy, in my 8 years of experience, I found really good, decent people who really care, you know, and actually it's very demoralizing when someone tries to, you know, I think, you know, detract from the quality of the work that people do. Given that, the fact of the matter is we take good care of our employees when we have the money, and when we don't have the money, our employees, I think of as family, have to, I think, step up to the plate and make the same kinds of sacrifices that everybody else is having to make when you're a family.
Exactly.
For example, I'll give you a small thing, $200,000 for hoarders. Do you know what the hoarders program is? Exactly. When I first heard about it, I said, hoarders, H-O-A-R-D-E-R-S, people who hoard things. Well, it's a psychological, emotional kind of a problem.
A hoarder
where
program?
People hold on to things to feel secure, and they don't want to get rid of them. And then, in a sense, they pack their small abodes, usually, with places where their landlords will come in and say, you can't have all this stuff, it's a fire hazard. Make a long story short, we have programs to help people psychologically then to be able to rid themselves of all this stuff that piles up. Can we afford $200,000 to help these people? And we're helping them to preserve their housing is one of the bottom line issues here, because if they don't get rid of some of their stuff, the landlords have an argument that they are jeopardizing a building.
The city of San Francisco is spending $200,000.
That's right.
To help who now?
Hoarders, people who hoard things. And those people who hoard things are subjected to eviction if the landlords can make a case that they are jeopardizing the safety of other people, because you could have a fire hazard from all the stuff that piles up in some people's places. I'm just giving you that as a quick example of the kind of detailed, you know.
That's amazing.
Tens of thousands. That is something to fund. When we can't afford it, maybe we give that a little less. We ask folks, say the police department. There was an article in the Chronicle the other day about how some of the inspectors say they can't take on new cases because they can't go and see their clients until 7 or 8 o'clock at night. Well, maybe they need to shift their gears, and instead of coming to work at 8 in the morning and from 4:30, you know, they work 4 10-hour shifts normally is the contract with the police department. They work 4 10s, it's called. They work 4 days, 10 hours a day. Well, maybe instead of, and you got to renegotiate that stuff too. But you know, you say instead of coming to work from 8 in the morning until 6 o'clock at night and 6:30 with a break, and then going on overtime at 6:30 or 7. Maybe you come to work at noon and you're ready at night, and those kinds of things to hold down overtime. I did a piece of legislation on overtime to limit overtime, to spread it. We call spreading and smoothing it. And it's a long, complicated story, but essentially that article failed to point out some of the problems around overtime.
How much overtime?
You've got tens of millions of dollars.
I mean overall, because last fiscal year, the fiscal budget, the mayor went back to the board of supervisors asking for an increase of another $100 million for overtime.
Well, if you spread that money out, one of the big areas we had about a $19 million problem with the jails. It's not Sheriff Hennessy's fault. It's a question of about 5 different parties coming together because they had to open these new what they call pods they had to reopen the old jail. And each pod holds about 60 prisoners, and you can have up to 6 pods, 360 prisoners out there. Well, they had to the sheriff, because you had all these folks coming in, the mayor ordered a crackdown. And through the police department, they cracked down. They started picking up people, like for various kinds of busts, particularly drug busts, for sales on the streets. Bam, bam, bam. Next thing you know, The sheriff had an additional, 1, 2, 3, at one point almost 300 more prisoners than he had at a comparable period before. And he said, well, I got to open up pod 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, next thing you knew, we had a $19 million overtime bill for the deputy sheriffs. Well, now the sheriff's working real hard, but he's got to work with the courts, he's got to work with the public defender, he's got to work with the district attorney, he's got to work with the office. There's a coordinating effort it can be made out of the mayor's office with Judge Ryan, and himself, and go to the courts. And so you call 4, 5, 6 different parties to say, can they agree to release people who are not violent offenders, not possible violent offenders, or have no history of any violent offenses, and put them on, say, what's called electronic monitoring devices.
Yeah.
Well, the sheriff's doing a pretty good job of moving that now, and he was actually able to get back to 2 pot. Next thing you know, you save 10 million, 15 million, there on one item.
Exactly.
Whether it's you take the abuse of disabled parking meters,
Oh
the
my
disabled
God.
placard abuse. There are 56,000 of these placards that are out there.
55,000?
And I recently asked MTA, the Muni folks, but the
Right.
Metropolitan Transportation Agency, and what's called the DPT in there, Department of Parking and Traffic, to go out just and do a 2-block area, about 30 vehicles, where I saw about 25, 26 of those vehicles all had disabled placards. 50% of the folks, they busted them for having illegal placards. That was just a little sample on California Street over by
Exactly.
Presidio. Well, if you could get $500 a year more out of every meter, we have 25,000 meters.
Right.
And then that's not even raising, the hourly fee. You'd have $12.5 million more right there. I've tried to get folks to work on that, but it's hard for them to prioritize. Unless I were the mayor and I ordered it, supervisors can only recommend, strongly urge,
Exactly.
suggest,
You're not the
and
executive.
so on and so on and so on, because we're not the executive branch where you have what's called a strong mayor system in San Francisco. Our charter gives the mayor a tremendous amount of day-to-day control, which is why when you pass a budget, we passed the budget and penned it in the end of June, and went into effect July the 1st. Well, the mayor, after that passes, that's the board passing the budget, and then we passed it 10-1 this year, and then the mayor signs it. Well, then after it's passed, the mayor can unilaterally, and it's not Gavin Newsom or
Right. Whoever the mayor is, yeah.
Jane Doe or whoever the
right.
mayor is, can choose not to spend those monies. The mayor is not allowed to choose to spend monies that were not appropriated by the legislative branch, the board of supervisors, but the mayor can decide not to. And usually, and as the budget chief the last year, I would sit down with the mayor and say, let's talk to this supervisor, that supervisor, that supervisor, this department, that department, and you do that, and it's a dynamic sort of consultative process.
Right.
And you say, these things are really important. For me, for example, helping the kids with foster care, particularly kids with what you call therapeutic foster care needs.
Right,
They're
right,
not
right.
only foster care. A lot of people still don't know that the idea of a foster child is what you used to call an orphan.
Right.
A kid, and it's not necessarily mom and dad are dead. They just don't have a mom and dad with them for whatever reasons. But therefore, the word foster
Now,
came out.
2/3 of the
Helping those
budget is
kids
salary,
is
right?
important.
2/3 of the budget is salary.
That's probably a pretty good estimate.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to pull out your capital project stuff. In other words, all the big projects.
Right.
It's going to vary quite a bit this year because we really pushed hard. In my last month, just as chair of the Budget and Finance Committee,
Right.
my last month in December, we pushed out almost $3 billion in capital projects, and that's part of our own local little economic stimulation program.
Right.
We didn't create something new, but we pushed it and accelerated it. About $2 billion for the water improvement projects that are
Right.
going on with the PUC.
That's
And,
the bond that was passed a couple of years ago, the $1.5 billion.
Quite a few years ago, we were authorized to spend up to about $4.2 billion, actually, 4.2,
okay.
4.3 billion. We've been, authorizing it in bits and pieces, and now I said push it out faster.
Right.
There was the 887 plus a little bit more, $887 million for the hospital over on Potrero, the general hospital facility that'll be built. That's $887 million. We had actually done something very interesting. We put $27 million up front to plan that thing so that as soon as it passed, we could get it right out the door and get it going. So you can break ground on that thing in late summer, early fall, which comes like that, and that'll be great.
Right.
That creates a lot of work, jobs, materials sold, and the idea that, of course, a dollar earned here and then spent multiplies 6 to 10 times within a very short period of time, within a matter of days and weeks.
Exactly how much?
So that's good for the economy.
How much is the deficit, absence and refusal?
Yeah, just a couple of months ago, yeah.
Right. he wanted some assistance to balance the budget. It's a mid-year.
It's called a mid-year, yeah.
It's a mid-year. Could you explain that, and how much is it? How much are we in deficit?
The mayor came in with a $118 million budget adjustment for this year.
Meaning we don't have we're over.
He said,
we're over
here's money I'm
million.
not going to spend. Here are jobs. 406 people are getting laid off. A total of a little over 700 jobs, including within the 406 being laid off. A little over 700 jobs, so about 300 of just vacant positions that will not be filled.
But those are positions that have been vacant for how many years?
Some of them yes, some of them no. Yeah, some have been vacant for a year or two. Some of the ones, whenever in the budget process, whenever we find them have been vacant for like 3 or 4 years, we just cut.
Yeah, right.
Not just a hatchet job, but we generally cut those positions because say if you can't fill them in a year or two, that means you really don't need them.
Right.
Because what happens is departments, it's kind of a clever little thing. It's a shame about term limits because I finally learned how to do the job after a few years, how to get the key in the door, and then they tell you you have to leave. It's stupid.
The job for mayor is opening in a couple of years.
Yeah. And as I mentioned to you earlier, before we went on air, if my wife were to sign that permission slip, that's the only way I would ever even think about such a job. I'd love to do the job, but it's very hard to run for those jobs. That's more grueling to run. At any rate, what happens is the mayor comes in and says, here are some things I'm not going to spend money on. Some of them he consulted with us on. Some of them consulted less. Some of them didn't consult too much. And depends on, whose ox is being gored is what they say, because it could be Supervisor A, B, C, and they don't have a very good relationship in time to talk to the mayor and the mayor's staff, his chief of staff, his budget chief, his budget team, and so on and so on, and department people. I mean, there's a lot of people you're talking to. Sometimes you just pick up the phone, you call the director of human services, and you're saying, look, can you guys get by on just $1 instead of $2 for a while? And if they say, oh, we really need, look, make it $1.50 and we can get by and we can serve these people. Because, your heart goes out. You're trying to serve people,
Who are these people who are getting laid off, though? I mean, they're not the big guys.
No, a lot of them are in, well, it's predictable. Almost 7,000 of our, about 13,000 of our employees come through what's a service group that's mainly in the SEIU unions.
Yeah.
Particularly one it's 10 unions that got merged into one. They call it 1021, in fact, 1021. It's called 1021. It's a little play on words too, and you got about 13,000 there out of about almost 27, 28,000 employees. Because they work in the hospitals, they offer services to people who need, whether it's shut-ins or children, helping with children and seniors and so on, vulnerable populations, we call them.
Right.
Well, they're bound to see more layoffs than anybody else.
Well, the first time
because there are more of them than anybody else.
Exactly. But the first time
nurses
the whole budget crunch came up, I thought, or the paper first reported that it was going to be lawyers. Did that ever happen? They were going to lay off lawyers from the
we have
office,
lawyers in the city attorney's office,
public defender's office.
We have public defender's office, and we have the district attorney's office.
Did they get laid off, or
some got laid off? But we did that. We did that in the budget this year.
Right.
I don't know how many. It wasn't many that the mayor was recommending, and his mid-year cuts, other than freezing positions. And saying, there were 2 or 3 positions here, 2 or 3 positions there, and they weren't going to fill them. But those are not the largest in terms of the numerical positions. I mean, one of the battles that often goes on here is that the folks who are making $157,000 versus the folks who are making $57,000.
Right.
The folks at the $57,000 level say, well, why don't you cut them at the top?
Exactly.
And that's much too simplistic, because 40 contracts with unions. But then the union contracts are not necessarily reopened right now. They could be subject to reopening if the union agrees, but the union's only going to agree if they think they're